to the
Okay. Are we on?
We are on.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Christopher Gardner. I have 2 kids in the district, and I graduated one who went to UC Davis, and now he's a grad student at UCSF. So I've been around for a long time. I've lived in the area since 1993, when I started as a postdoc at Stanford. Undergrad, I was a philosophy major in upstate New York at Colgate University, turned into a vegetarian, got a PhD by mistake, got a faculty position by mistake. And I've been at Stanford for 25 years and have fed and bled 2,000 people in this area to see what happens to their cholesterol, blood pressure, weight, insulin, glucose. So my PhD is in nutrition science. I've served on the American Heart Association's Nutrition Committee. I'm currently serving on the American Diabetes Association's Nutrition Committee to re-update their guidelines. I've been nominated to be on the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee that's going to update them. They do that every 5 years. And I like just talking about nutrition a lot. And so I'm here, and I do lots of different kinds of talks. I often have a lot of slideshows. So I teach Stanford undergrads, and I'm mostly a researcher. And I go all over the country and sometimes the world showing slides. But I've tried this new format, and I did it at Fairmeadow Elementary, and it worked really well, and Dave attended that for some reason, right? And so instead of slides, I pointed out that I know a whole lot about 2 domains of food. And so this is sort of a traditional nutrition science thing. And this is a little boring, but people always have questions. How much protein should I eat? Do plants have amino acids? For carbohydrates, oh my God, should I switch out sugar for artificial sweeteners? And what about fiber and the microbiome? Because fiber counts as a carbohydrate. And how about fat? I know is saturated bad if it's from a plant fat? Or what about dairy fat? Or what about coconut oil? Right? And then down at the bottom I have vitamins and minerals. That's classic nutrition. And a lot of times that's a supplement thing. Should I take the supplement that has vitamins or minerals? And you can barely probably see something called phytochemicals. Basically, those are things in ginseng or garlic or things that aren't vitamins and minerals, but they're molecules that we thought might be protective of health. And so a lot of people buy supplements. I could speak to that. Or, about 10 years ago, a pediatrician and I started teaching a class at Stanford undergrads called Food and Society. And we stopped talking about health whatsoever. We talked about animal rights and welfare, global warming and climate change as it relates to food, slaughterhouses, fast food workers, agricultural workers, genetically modified organisms, organic, or then sort of folding that all into ketogenic, Mediterranean, vegetarian, vegan. So this is sort of more of a lifestyle approach, and this is sort of a geeky, oh, this can be like a medical thing, like a drug, because I can give somebody a pill of this and a placebo. So you actually know a lot more about this metabolically, but you don't go to the store to buy this. You go and maybe you look for an organic label or not. Or maybe you see a GMO label or not, or you wish there was a GMO label. Or maybe you really wonder what some of that stuff means, or what the hell is the ketogenic diet. So my latest thing is to just come and take questions. Because what I found is what a lot of people show up for is to get some of their personal questions answered. And some don't. Some just come like, I want to hear what everybody else asks. I'm really not a question asker. But this is, I've been trying this, and so I thought I would see again how it would work if you drive the question. And I'm going to start the conversation this way. There's going to be a little audience participation. So hopefully you're sitting in the room long enough to look at the boards, and I just reviewed them. So if I just gave you 3 choices, and I'm going to read through them, and raise your hand for your 3 favorite choices, and I'll start with those, and then let's see how much time that takes, right? And then I'll actually be able to address the things that most of you are confused about. So you get 1 more minute to look. Okay, sorry, the minute's over. All right, who thinks protein is a confusing, interesting issue? Only 2, 3. Okay, so I'm just gonna go 1, 2, 3. Oh, this doesn't have to go. Okay, carbohydrates, sweeteners, things like that. Oh, yeah. Okay, that way more. Okay, star for carbs. Fats, different kinds of fats, and coconut oil and dairy oil. Okay, you know, I'm really good at explaining protein. This is a disappointment, but that's okay. Okay, vitamins and minerals, supplements, things like that. See, I only got 2. Phytochemicals, it's not. Okay, see, I only got 1. How about things like, and I'm not picking one in particular, but more the organic, GMO, antibiotic-free. Anybody? Oh, only 1. Oh, I'm going to be on the other side. How about these kinds of things, like a, okay, see, there's a big, all right, I'll leave a big star there. So why don't I, so this will, oh my God, because carbohydrates and fats kinds of feeds into these diets. A lot of the confusion about the diets is like how much carbs and how much fats and what kind. So why don't we start over here and dig down a little deeper, and you get to ask a specific question. So somebody willing to frame a question about carbohydrates that's confusing? Yeah.
So about the glycemic index, it's hard to figure what really, how it impacts you, because I believe it also depends on how much of it you're eating.
Yeah.
So for example, watermelon has a high glycemic index.
Yeah.
But you have to eat this much for it to really affect you.
Yeah.
Or honey has a high glycemic index.
Yeah.
But you know, you're never having more than a spoonful. So
I'll help you.
Yeah.
So don't pay attention to the glycemic index.
That's easy.
So for those of you who don't understand what it is, so it was invented a long time ago by David Jenkins and another guy, I'm blanking on his name at the moment, and they thought, and an issue with nutrition is how fast blood glucose from food shows up in your blood as blood glucose. And what you'd really like metabolically is a nice steady supply, and what you don't want is a quick spike. And so they came up with this metric that most people don't actually understand what it is. They take 50 grams of either glucose or 50 grams of glucose in white bread, and they feed it to a person. And then 2 hours later, they see what their level of glucose is in their blood. And then they take 50 grams of carbohydrate from watermelon or carrot or anything else, and they see how high the glucose is in their blood. And that's the glycemic index. And the problem with that is carrots have a relatively high glycemic index, but to get 50 grams of carbohydrate in carrots, you have to eat a bushel. And no one eats a bushel.
Right.
And so they have another term called glycemic load, which kind of addresses your question. So you take the speed with which it shows up in your blood, but you multiply it by how many grams of carbohydrate you actually ate.
So then you have to look at the carbohydrate content of each of those foods.
But I'm going to tell you not to. So here's why. Okay. So at the end of the day, it's actually helpful for me as a researcher. If I already know what you guys ate, if you kept diet records and I look, I can actually calculate both the glycemic index and the glycemic load from that. And I might be able to relate it to health factors down the road. However, for an average person to look at this table, there's 2,400 foods in the table. And it's something that diabetics will use because they're trying to control their blood sugar. So ice cream has a lower glycemic index than carrots. Why? Because it's full of fat. And it's not just carbs. And so the fat content of the ice cream slows down the absorption. That doesn't mean ice cream is healthy. But people game the system because that's what Americans love to do. It's like, I really don't want to give up any of the crap that I eat. Can I figure out a way to justify eating crap? And so the glycemic index is often used by people to game the system. If you really looked at sort of the overarching thing, the things that have the lowest glycemic index, don't fall out of your chair, vegetables, beans, whole intact grains.
Yeah.
And so there's no real new information there. It's not like, holy crap, jelly beans are awesome. Who would have known? No, they're not. And so it's not useful for very many people unless you really got into the subtle nuances. That would be my response. Does that make sense? So it's a tool. Yeah, stick with the stuff that just makes sense. So I mean, as a quickie too, so I'll just give you one last example. White bread and whole wheat bread have the same glycemic index. Isn't that a little annoying? Why would whole wheat bread, isn't that supposed to sound more nutritious?
Yeah.
How do you make bread? You make bread with wheat kernels or with wheat flour. The flour basically has all the digestion done for you. If you're waiting to digest it to get it in your bloodstream, the stone ground whole wheat flour, there's no digestion left. You eat the bread and it gets all watery in your gut and you absorb the glucose really fast. Anybody make a wheat berry salad lately? I make a kick-ass wheat berry salad. That has a way lower glycemic index than white bread or whole wheat bread because it's the whole intact grain. You have to chew it. It hits your intestinal tract. It's not flour, so the enzymes have to get access to it, and it takes a while for the glucose to show up. So it's sort of the more intuitive things will work better than trying to figure out the glycemic index. Another one. Yes?
So I have a good friend who is heritage is from East India.
Uh-huh.
He has some pre-diabetes. He used to be sort of a semi-vegetarian and marathon runner.
Uh-huh.
And he is very into fad diets and fad whatever. And so he has convinced himself that he needs to do intermittent fasting and eat excessive amounts of fat and protein and no carbs.
Oh, let me
So
hold
he
off
eats
a
no
little on
breakfast
that
and
because
no
it's going to
lunch.
be the ketogenic diet thing. But I could relate this to the Indian diet and rice and simple carbs and sugar. They've been putting a lot of sugars and simple carbs in their food. And so for the Asian population in particular, and in particular the ones that have migrated to the Bay Area, if you ask culturally what they're doing, they're eating festival foods every day. Their home culture was having dals and lentils and some really fabulous dishes. And they got here and they're having festival foods every day. And then you get somebody else to look at what they're eating and they say, I used to have that once a month. You're having that once a day? Oh my God. And so they're actually genetically predisposed to type 2 diabetes. And they get it at an even smaller body mass index or being overweight than non-Asians. And it's probably that. They're probably sort of abusing the festival foods of their culture.
Right. So I get that kind of a grainitarian type of thing of bread and rice, but I guess my concern is that
All the
somebody-
fat and protein are eating.
Yeah.
I'll go there.
Saturated fat.
The ketogenic diet is nuts. And I'm going to study it in a minute, like about to get a whole bunch of money to study it. But so I don't have a definitive answer on it. So let me put the rest of the question on hold. But a simple thing, a starter point would be less white rice, brown rice, less naan, less chapati. You know, actually, so if you want to eat Indian food, and actually there's some Asians who don't want to eat Indian food, they want to eat American food. But if you wanted to go with Indian food, Deepa Thomas, you could Google this. Her husband was one of the local CEOs who made $1 bazillion and they have more money than God, and he got diabetes. And she reversed it in 5 days cooking for him, and he's been off insulin for 5 years. And she wrote a cookbook called Deepa's Slow Carb Indian Cooking. And so what she did is she took out the rice and the naan and the chapatis, and there were plenty of vegetables and lentils and dals. And it's all the turmeric and curry and cumin and all the masala, fabulous stuff. And so Deepa Thomas's Slow Carb Indian Cooking has some fabulous recipes, and she reversed her husband's diabetes with it. And it has plenty of carbs, lots of carbs, but slowly digested carbs along sort of the line of the glycemic index. It shows up more slowly. And then I will follow through later on ketogenic stuff.
Sugar, how much?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, I don't know, we shouldn't have too much refined sugar, but does that mean one small treat a day, or a week, or a month?
Yeah, there's no answer. It is useless, right? It doesn't come with any extra nutrition. And
Yeah.
how many of you are surprised by that? You all know that, right? How many of you had absolutely no added sugar in the last week? I don't believe you, but God bless you if you did. That is phenomenal. I never meet these people. I want to follow you.
Okay.
I did. I had 70% dark chocolate this afternoon, and 70% dark chocolate is 30% sugar.
That's sad to me.
No, maybe.
We don't want to follow that. Sorry, I'm just.
So I'm
position.
I'm writing a book right now, and I'm dealing with sugar at this very moment. And one of the things I did is I looked at how much sugar Americans eat. And the average American, so the USDA has this really incredible database of what foods get produced and consumed in the US. Americans eat 100 grams of sugar a day. That's 400 calories. And let's not get into how many calories people eat. So you're not going to like me when I say this because you're not going to believe me, but women eat 2,400 calories a day and guys eat 3,000 calories a day. And I know you're going to tell me you eat less than that. I don't want to get into an argument. But let's say 400, let's just use like 2,000 and 3,000 calories as sort of a range of what people eat. If you're more physically active, you eat more than that. 400 calories out of 2,000 is a lot, isn't it? Or 400 out of 3,000 is a lot. And there's sort of these fascinating trends of cane and beet sugar, and then high fructose corn syrup came along and displaced a lot of that, and cane and table went down, and then they kind of met. But Americans, if you look at total sugar they've eaten since 1970, it's almost rock solid, 90 to 100 grams of sugar a day. Since 1970, 50 years, we've been eating 100 grams of sugar a day. It's insane. A little bit of maltodextrose or honey or molasses, but it's really cane and beet and high fructose corn sugar. Okay, so I've been sort of having fun playing with those numbers. And then, how many of you had any fruit or vegetable in the last week? Because those are natural sugars. That's not the same, right? So, and how much sugar would you get from that? So I made a little table. I took sort of a half cup of 5 random vegetables and a half cup of 4 random fruits. So technically the dietary guidelines, you've probably all heard the 5-a-day thing, have 5 veggies and fruits a day. The real dietary guidelines say 5 to 9 a day. And the reason they don't say it very often is because most Americans get 1.5 servings a day, and they don't want to make it so daunting. So they don't focus on the 9. But a lot of this is just a half a cup. So if you really got the 9 servings a day they advise, there'd be 5 half cups of fruit, vegetables and 4 half cups of fruits, you get about 300 calories and about 45 grams of sugar. Right? That would be 45 grams of sugar, natural sugar. So if you're looking to sweeten things, I know you thought that was sad, but there's a lot of things that you can sweeten with fruits and vegetables. Some of the vegetables can be sweet. Yeah? Go ahead, build on this question.
How about things like coconut sugar and
Yeah, they're
honey?
all sugar.
So,
Molasses is sugar.
trace minerals,
Honey
tomato.
is sugar. It's all added sugar.
So I don't eat 5 fruits a day.
And you don't have to. No, that
Okay.
yeah.
No, I guess that's where I'm going. Is it, what's the?
It's a guideline.
Mm.
No, there's no one perfect way to eat. It's just a guide. So and do you not eat so many fruits because you eat more savory things and you avoid fruits? So
Well,
you're really adamant about added sugar, and you're
I am.
even cautious about the sugar in fruit.
No, I just
Oh.
I eat a banana a day or something, but I just don't crave it, and I don't.
It's funny, so my 13-year-old right now will eat all kinds of veggies. He'll eat cherry tomatoes hand over fist. He cuts up a red bell pepper every day, and then I'll put a fruit in front of him and he won't eat it.
Hmm.
So everybody's a little bit different. But getting back to this, so how much like added sugar can you have? So it's not the idea that if you now started eating 10 grams of sugar a day, you would get diabetes. You wouldn't, or 20, or 40. So there isn't a number, and part of this is joy. So one of the things that I'm pretty frustrated about in nutrition is sort of with all the guidelines, taking the joy out of food. And we need to get back to the joy, and we need some culinary literacy. We should be cooking more. We should be eating with our families and cooking for friends. And some of those are celebrations, and a lot of celebrations have added sugar. So I don't really see anything wrong with a modest amount of added sugar, and I can't define what a modest amount is. The best amount is 0. Not many people are willing to do 0, and if you say you have to get to 0, you'll just piss people off, and a lot of them won't listen to you. So what I really try to help people do is sort of put it in perspective of how much they're getting and say there is a ton of room for less, and then make them be thinking, so I really didn't need that cookie, and I'm really not going to get 50% dark chocolate, I'm going to get 70, and then I'm going to try 85, and then I'm going to go to Bryant Street and go to that guy's insanely expensive chocolate, and he has some of the best 100% cacao in the world, and it's right on Bryant Street, pretty close to university. So if you can, I'll give you one other sugary thing. So we now have this program at Stanford called the Well Registry, and then you should all do Well for Life if you want. And we had a sugar detox challenge to our folks in the Well Registry, and we kind of had people blogging and talking with one another. Some of them got headaches in the first couple days because they were addicted to sugar. And a surprising number of them in a week were stunned how they were over it. It's like, I don't actually want, I haven't had it for a week, and now I don't want it. And so you actually get over this sugar addiction fairly quickly, but then there's a downside to this. If you go back at all, it comes back with a vengeance. Like you say, I've been super good for a week, so I'm gonna have one cookie. Maybe I was so good, I'm gonna have 2 cookies. I was really good, wasn't I? I'm gonna have 3 cookies, and then the next day they're back. So you can control your sugar intake. And there's lots of different strategies and lots of things that you could do for joy. And you could be cooking more with fruits and different things. So there's other ways to sweeten it. The best is 0. It's just that not many people can do 0. So I'm super impressed. I don't do 0.
So they're having some guidelines put out. What do you think about them? The WHO put some guidelines for limits on added sugar daily, and I think
Okay, I'll just do that really quickly because we should move on to other topics. So WHO has always said less than 10% added sugar.
Right.
Not sugar, added sugar. Until the last dietary guidelines came out in 2015, the American guideline was less than 25% of your calories should come from added sugar. That was totally political. That was totally driven by the sugar industry. That was obscene. That's more than that 400 calories a day from sugar. So in 2015, they're aligned with WHO saying less than 10% of your calories. But if you eat 2,000 or 3,000 calories, that's 200 or 300 calories a day from honey, molasses, high fructose corn syrup, cane sugar, or beet. It's a lot. So I'm in favor of going to 10%. You could certainly go lower. It doesn't come with any nutrition. It does come with joy. You have pictures of little babies, like a neonatal kid just pops out of mommy and they put some lemon and something else and savory, and they put sugar on their tongue, and the little kid's face lights up with joy from the sugar on their tongue. So there is something really evolutionarily in your body that says, oh wow, I found something that will give me energy to run from the tiger and climb the tree and survive. There's nothing healthy about it. And it is a huge problem in the US. That's one of our biggest nutritional problems, is all the added sugar we eat. Can I leave that one alone and go somewhere else? Should we go to fats so I can get over on this side too? Let's do some fat things, and maybe that'll actually lead us over to ketogenic-y type things. But how about coconut oil or dairy fat?
Coconut oil and the bullet coffees. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the Dean Asprey guy, I think that's his name, that puts like a half a stick of butter in coffee for his bulletproof coffee. I can't refute it. I don't have data that shows that he killed anyone. It makes all of us health professionals cringe.
Right.
You should drink black coffee. Coffee's actually good for you. Coffee and green tea are both good for you. And probably black tea too. But not the butter. So that it's sort of part of this ketogenic craze. It doesn't make any sense. Saturated fat always raises the bad cholesterol in your blood. There's way more to life than the bad cholesterol in your blood. So let's not get too hung up on LDL cholesterol. And that does. If you would put half stick of butter in your coffee, all else being the same, your LDL cholesterol would go up. Is it joyful, and does it somehow, for some people, they say it's satiating and it gets them started and they're on this high, and I don't get it, and I wouldn't ruin my coffee that way. Did you also put medium chain triglyceride? He sells stuff. So part of his problem is he sells a lot of crap that goes with this.
Right.
So I'm always wary of that. So I can't disprove the bulletproof coffee. It just doesn't make any sense. But did you also say coconut oil?
Well, yeah, I've also heard people recommend putting coconut oil and medium chain fatty acids.
Yeah, so an interesting thing about all fats is they're all carbon chains. And they run from 4 carbons to like 26 carbons. And so just to break them down super quickly, the really long ones are the ones in fish. That's like the omega-3s that you find in fish, the eicosapentaenoic acid and the docosahexaenoic acid, the EPA and DHA. And then the stuff we eat mostly has 16 and 18. That's going to be in all the grains, and that's olive oil and sunflower oil and canola oil and avocado oil, just about anything you eat. Coconut oil is unique because it has 12 and 14 carbons in their fatty acid length. And so I actually had to do a summary of this a long time ago. And if you looked at all the data, it is saturated. The 12 and 14 count as saturated. And it raises your LDL cholesterol even more than some of the other saturated fats, but it also raises your HDL cholesterol.
Right.
And the HDL is the good one. And so if you're really taking sort of a more holistic view, it would be a ratio of the good and the bad. And it's not too bad, because it raises the bad one and it raises the good one. And then I would bring it back to food. Again, I make kind of a kick-ass coconut curry veggie dish. And I put coconut milk in there. And that really adds to the flavor. And I eat so many more vegetables because I make this coconut curry vegetable dish. And it's got coconut milk. And so I don't chug coconut milk. I don't wake up in the morning and have a glass of coconut milk. I cook with it. And so a lot of these questions depend on what dose you're using and what you're having with it. So if it's black coffee that you've ruined by putting a stick of butter in it, that's one thing. If there's something that you've sauteed in a small amount of butter, I'm not really that opposed to butter. There's some people who really, they used to use butter and now they're sauteing with some other thing and it just doesn't taste right to them. And they were sauteing some veggies. So it's helping me eat more veggies. So in the context of the whole diet, I think some of the coconut milk and coconut oil stuff has been interesting. I also make some coconut oil sweet potato fries, so I just bake them, right? So I'll just cut up a sweet potato and pour on a little coconut oil and mix them up a little, throw them in the oven and bake them, not deep fry them. And it is so good with a little coconut oil on them. And then, so I would go there.
Okay.
So it depends how you're using it to prepare stuff. Has anybody got a unique way that they're using coconut oil that they're concerned about, or a great way to suggest?
Moisturizer for your skin.
Oh no. Okay. And then, all right, let's not go there.
What we find with Indian cooking and also from Ayurveda, which is the medicinal side of Indian cooking.
Yes.
What is recommended is to cook with coconut oil in the summer, but sesame oil in the fall and winter mustard oil. So you choose the oil by
Wow.
the season, because the oil is
Yeah.
also giving other energetics in your body.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And ghee, of course, is highly recommended,
Right.
even in Ayurveda.
But clarified butter.
Yeah.
And I don't know much about any health impacts of cooking with ghee, or if too much ghee is a problem, or too much. So again, it's going to be how much do you actually consume it. If you consume it all the time, anything is probably too much. But if you're using it to flavor food, and I want to keep dipping back into flavor and joy, there's some flavor and joy in coconut oil there, and then there, and then there.
It's not about coconut oil.
Okay.
Should I
So
hold
yeah,
it?
can I stick
Okay.
on coconut oil for a minute, if that's where we are?
Yeah, it's more
Okay.
of a sort of an overarching thing that it seems that, to me, it seems that part of the problem might be that everything is just too easily available. If you had to make that coconut milk yourself, break the coconut, grind it, scrape it, run it in the blender,
Yeah.
it would take you a long time. You're not going to drink or have 3 cans of coconut milk.
Yeah.
You're going to have a little bit which you use for your curry and you're done.
Yeah.
So it seems like
And we're not going back, are we? Right? You're not gonna, best would be we all grew all our own food, and if we want to eat animals, we'd raise them, we'd slit their necks, slaughter them, skin them, cut them up, and you just wouldn't eat so much of anything.
you wouldn't.
And you'd know all the ingredients that went in it, because you cut it, raised it, grew it, etc. Yeah, but sorry, we're not doing that in it. But it's not a yes or no. You can get closer. You have backyard gardens. You can meet your farmer at the farmer's market and ask them how they're raising their food in the back.
My question was also not about coconut oil.
Okay, well then let's go back to you and then I'll go to you, because I
Okay.
skipped you.
Do you recommend high fat or full fat or fat-free dairy?
And so it's a fascinating question and we don't have an answer. And I can't answer it scientifically, so it's going to be an unscientific answer that whole fat dairy is an unprocessed food and non-fat dairy is a processed food. I tend to lean toward unprocessed foods.
But it's a saturated fat that raises your LDL.
It is. So a friend of mine at Harvard, actually now he's at Tufts, Dariush Mozaffarian, has some interesting nurses' health study data, which ends up in the New York Times all the time and the New England Journal of Medicine. And they've been tracking these nurses since 1980. And they ask them what they're eating every 4 years, and they have a group of people that switch, and they notice how they switched. And so he was seeing who switched from whole fat to 2% to 1 and back and forth. And the paper he published was on weight. And a lot of the issue has been about number of calories. Fat has 9 calories per gram and protein and carb has 4. And so it seems like you get heavier if you ate fat. And so drink non-fat milk. The weight difference in women who were switching back and forth was Zippo.
And
And they
measure
didn't,
their
this paper
cholesterol?
didn't look at the cholesterol. But so one of the issues here that's probably relevant is it's quite likely that drinking an 8-ounce glass of whole fat milk is more satiating. And so one of the things that's really hard to take into account is when did you stop eating? When did you feel full? And so you might actually have consumed fewer calories overall drinking the whole fat milk. And if you did, maybe somehow because you drank that, you didn't have bacon. And so your LDL went down because there's something in your body was satiated by having that and you didn't, or you had less bacon or something. So I don't have good data on that, so it's funny, we call him Dary for short, D-A-R-Y, but he studies dairy a lot. And he has been writing a whole bunch of stuff, so it sounds like a complicated name, but if you could kind of phonetically spell out Dariush Mozaffarian. He's now the Dean of Public Health at Tufts University. He's been writing a whole lot of stuff on whole fat dairy. It's pretty interesting. So I don't drink any dairy. So I've been vegan for a decade and vegetarian, just for kicks, for disclosure here, vegetarian for 35 years and vegan for 10. Except for the chickens in my backyard. So if I can hug my chicken, I have their eggs. So that's how I eat. I eat a lot of carbs and a lot of fat and very little protein. Yes?
To continue the question about my question is about saturated fat and where we stand on saturated fat's role in cardiovascular disease versus sugar.
Yeah.
I know I hear the connection to cholesterol, but where is it?
What did you hear about cholesterol?
Sorry?
What did you hear about cholesterol?
Well, not so much about cholesterol, but that saturated fat may
It's
not
okay, I
play
didn't
as
mean-
big of a role in cardiovascular
Right.
disease as we thought, and that sugar might be.
It's not so much
driving
cholesterol.
that.
So let's blow out cholesterol. Eggs are really not too bad. If you wanted to pick some foods to not like, eggs are fine, probably. So the saturated fat thing has become a little confusing because of 2 different groups of scientists that did meta-analyses in the last 5 or 6 years. And a meta-analysis takes tons of studies and pulls them all together and tries to come up with one answer. So in case it looks like one individual study might be inconsistent or not powerful enough to see a big effect, maybe pooling them all will give you something. And both of them generated enormous headlines that saturated fat is vindicated. They did these new studies. Turns out there's nothing wrong with it. I don't know if that's what you've heard.
More that it's not the primary driver for cardiovascular disease like we have thought for the last.
So here's what's confusing, Bill. I'm going to frame it this way. And I'm going to have to oversimplify it because of how much time and what we're doing today. So really what the studies were looking at is the people who are eating low and high saturated fat. And what they were checking out was who had heart disease 10 or 20 years later. And the people who had low or high saturated fat in their diet had the same amount of heart disease 20 years later. So they said, does it really make a difference? If you looked a little deeper, people who had the lowest saturated fat had the highest sugar. And so what they had done is they had lowered their saturated fat and added sugar. And if they ate less sugar, they ate more saturated fat. David Katz wrote this really pithy thing. He said, Americans are brilliant. They have more than one way to eat horrifically. They just eat horrifically one way, and then somebody advises them to change, and they find another horrific way to eat. And then they say, oh look, saturated fat isn't bad for you. And really what the conclusion should have said is, both saturated fat and added sugar are bad for you. And a lot of people swap one for the other if you look at the types of foods that they're eating. So sort of the whole low-fat message that public health professionals gave for decades encouraged Entenmann's and Snackwells and all these not beans and grains and veggies. It was snack foods. Low-fat cookies, low-fat chips, low-fat whatever, and a lot of them had a lot of sugar. So we shifted. So So it's not that we thought saturated fat was bad and we were wrong and now sugar is bad. They're both bad. They're equally plausible hypotheses, and Americans eat too much of both. How's that? Is that okay?
Yes.
Does that make sense? Okay, that would be my answer.
I just have a comment that
that kind of goes along with the gluten-free, that most of the gluten-free alternative products are filled with sugar.
They're
And
crap.
so
Like, I have this
if
big
people
slide on my
and
thing,
gain
and it's
weight.
a stack of brownies. It says, I know gluten was giving you a problem, so we have come up with gluten-free brownies. Eat this health. Are you serious? All you gotta do is stop eating wheat. Go ahead for the barley and go ahead for the legumes and everything else, but you switched from white flour, pastries, pizza crust, bagels, cookies, and chips, and you're now making gluten-free brownies. That's your answer. Welcome to America. Oh my God. Only in America. Yeah, so that kind of thing. Just out of kicks for timing, and remind me how this was billed, 6:30 to 8?
As long as you want.
Right, and so,
That's on my calendar, I don't know.
yeah, so I can talk forever. And I like to talk, and I want to be respectful of your time. We're kind of halfway through 6:30 to 8, if that's what we're doing. If anybody ever wants to walk out of here, like at 7:30, if they thought it was only an hour, I will not be embarrassed that you walked out. So it's totally open-ended. If this is working, just asking questions. I'll probably take questions in at 8 if it's dwindling. I'll just stop and you could ask me a couple of personal questions. And if it dwindles before 8, we'll just wind down for 8. It's just super open-ended. You can tell I'm a little informal here. Yeah? Okay?
So I know I didn't get started, but I would love to hear your thoughts about protein.
Oh, can I please? Thank you.
Versus animal-based and tips for making,
Yeah. Okay, so my big thing is and part of this is just self-defensive. After 35 years, I'm so frigging sick and tired of people asking me where I get my protein. So right now, I'm almost sure it's accepted in the Journal of Nutrition Reviews. We have put together this enormous thing that came about because I'm now on the scientific advisory board of the CIA.
All right.
The Culinary Institute of America. Not the Pentagon.
But it's better, that's great.
And the Culinary Institute of America has banded with Harvard and Stanford in a couple of efforts to rethink unapologetic deliciousness in food, bring back the joy. And the leading headline is unapologetic deliciousness, and under it is and nutritionally healthy and good for the environment. They're not leading with those two messages because people like taste and joy, but they're there. And one of their main themes has been a protein flip. They've been pushing to have the center of the plate be plants. And you could be vegan, but if you're going to have some meat, you should have strips of beef or chicken, or it should be a condiment, or it should be the side dish. And the center of the plate should be grains and beans and veggies. And they were a little worried that people were going to freak out about where they're getting their protein. So about 5 years ago, they asked me to do a little Protein 101 for their culinary conference. And so I sat down and I said, okay, they only gave me 8 minutes, and so I know it's a myth, but the true part is all plants have all 20 amino acids. They have all the essential ones, all the non-essential ones. There's this really trivial things where grains are a little low in lysine, not missing, just a little low, and beans are a little low in methionine, not missing, but low. And I made these graphs, and I showed amino acid distributions in dozens and dozens of food. And just out of curiosity, has anybody here never played Scrabble in their life? And let me make sure you're listening. Has anybody played Scrabble in their life? Okay, you know how big the Scrabble board is? And you get a bag of letters, and it's got 100 letters. And there's 26 letters in the alphabet. So there's 4 of each letter, right? No! How many E's and R's and N's and how many X's and J's and Z's are there?
Right.
That's what the amino acids are like. So you have almost no tryptophan, and you have a ton of glutamate. And so if you look at the distribution of 20 amino acids, there's a lot of some and a little of others and everything in the middle. So I made these graphics for people. Beans, grains, salmon, cheese, eggs, and their mouths just dropped. They said, what? All those distributions look the same. And I said, they're not the same. Look more closely. The grains are a little low in lysine. They said, but we thought lysine was missing. It's not missing. It's just proportionally low. And then look at the beans. What do you see? It looks fine to me. Yeah, but methionine, you only need this much, and it only has this much. And so it's proportionally low. And that's why they got this rap for being low. Now, the protein guidelines for Americans, I don't know if you know what they are, the recommended daily allowance is for women to get 45 grams a day and men to get 55. That particular number is based on a bell curve of requirement. and they figured out the requirement, and there's an estimated average requirement. So you're gonna have to do a little math here. And so is the recommended daily allowance the average requirement? No, that would be not a good health approach, because if everybody got the average requirement, wouldn't half be short? Okay, so the recommended daily allowance is 2 standard deviations above the average requirement. So 45 grams a day for women and 55 grams a day for men is 2 standard deviations above the average requirement, which means it's more than 97.5% of the population needs. If you do the bell curve. Do you know how much protein Americans get? 80 to 100 grams a day. Women get 80 and men get 100. And so that we eat twice the RDA. Okay, so picture you're a vegetarian or a vegan and you're playing Scrabble and somebody gives you 2 bags of letters. That's what protein is like in the American diet. Can you put 2 bags of Scrabble letters on a board? If you've played Scrabble, once you've used all 100 letters, there's really no more room to put words on there. So after you've made all your hair, skin, nails, enzyme, hormones, you also have no place to store protein. You can store endless amounts of fat. You can store a modest amount of carbohydrate in your skeletal muscle and your liver, but there's no place to store protein. So whatever you've eaten in excess, you turn into carbs. And then if you've fulfilled your storage for carbs in your liver and your skeletal muscle, you turn the amino acid carbons in protein to fat. So it just turns to carbs and fat anyway. And people seem mystified. So I got to do that in 8 minutes for these chefs. And I've now done a 20-minute talk, a half-an-hour talk, and I went to a sports convention and they asked me to do a 2-hour talk on protein. And part of my talk to the athletes was, I used one of my Stanford Rose Bowl football players as an example. He eats 6,000 calories a day. He eats 300 grams of protein a day without trying, just because he's working out. And it's in everything. It's in raspberries. It's in romaine lettuce. There's protein in everything. So you really can't not get enough. The quote from the nutrition book that I use is, it's of theoretical interest, but not of any practical interest in the US. You'd have to work super hard to be protein deficient unless all you were eating was cookies and snacks.
Yeah.
And then I go and I talk at medical conferences and I say this, and I say, I'm just curious, how many of you had vegans or vegetarians in your practice? And everybody's hands go up, they have some. How many of you have ever treated someone in your entire career for protein deficiency? No hand goes up, and they all start looking around the room. I said, so what is this thing? Why are Americans so obsessed with protein? Sorry, that's my rant.
So I have just a quick, sometimes I hear concerns about being vitamin B deficient or with
For vegans.
B12.
Yeah,
B12.
or B12, yeah. Is that a concern? Where do you?
So that's a really quickie. So of all the
Yeah.
vitamins and minerals, so picture this, you need grams of protein, carbs, and fat each day. For a lot of the vitamins and minerals, you need milligrams or micrograms. And these are 1,000-fold differences. Your recommended daily allowance for B12 is 2 micrograms a day. It is the lowest of any vitamin. It's so low that you could get it if you don't wash your carrots. So basically, animals don't actually have B12. Animals graze on dirty food. Bacteria makes B12, and they eat dirty food. And they concentrate the B12 made by the bacteria on the ground. So you technically, you could get it if you just don't clean all your food off. Or you could eat nutritional yeast if you're vegetarian. Or you could take a B vitamin complex thing if you were vegan. And there's not really that many vegans out there, so the ovo-lacto ones are fine. Uh-huh.
So are you saying even for athletes, there's no requirement to eat extra protein?
No, there isn't. And there's going to be a really interesting film coming out, The Change Makers. So who made Avatar? Cameron. James Cameron?
Yeah.
So it's all vegan athletes. There's a film about vegan athletes. And there's Mr. Universe vegan athletes. Not as many. It's harder to be Mr. Universe. But okay, so who's good at math? Let's do a really quick math problem here. I do this to my students all the time. Would it be ambitious in 1 year to gain 22 pounds of muscle? Not weight, 22 pounds of muscle in 1 year. Does that sound ambitious? Okay, that's 10 kilos, right? Muscle is 70% water. So it's really over the course of the year, not 10,000 grams, but 3,000 grams of amino acids you'd have to retain in your skeletal muscle to be 22 pounds of muscle bigger. Divide 3,000 grams into 365 days over the course of the year. How many extra grams of protein would you have to keep? 10. Americans eat 100 grams of protein a day. Athletes who are working out can you imagine how physically active you'd have to be to put on 22 grams? You would have to eat 4, 5, or 6,000 calories a day. You could not possibly not eat enough protein with no supplements, no powders. You could be vegan. You couldn't not get enough to put on the 22 pounds of muscle. You have to work out. You can't sit on the couch and pound protein powder and say, woo, protein, I'm putting on muscle. It's all working out. It's not what you're eating. I actually have I'll go on one other riff here. So there was a recent thing, a paper that came out last year while I was teaching human nutrition. It was a meta-analysis of 40 trials. And it specifically was in a Men's Health magazine. And it said, we looked to see how much protein adult men need to maintain or put on some muscle. And the RDA for them might be wrong. They might need 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, and the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. So the interesting thing is the American public eats 1.6 grams per kilo. I told you they eat twice the RDA already. And so really the main conclusion of this study was that men who want to put on muscle should eat what they already eat. And then I asked the students, I had 45 students, I asked each one of them to read the papers that came up with this conclusion, and they were horrified at how weak the study designs were. It was a one meal of protein and 2 muscle biopsies. And it was, what you think is, oh, didn't they take 100 40-year-old men and ask them to work out on different diets, and then they saw how much, 2 months later, how much muscle? No, there weren't studies like that. So it's not really, there's not a lot of data even to show the 1.6, like the double the RDA thing. So really you couldn't, to be active enough to gain muscle as an athlete, you couldn't possibly not get enough protein unless you ate cookies.
You just have to eat a lot more.
Ooh, yeah. These athletes, the Stanford athletes, are eating all day long to support their workouts. It takes a really long time. I'm going to start shifting over here.
Yeah, that's.
Can I ask a quick question about protein, which got a few votes?
Yeah.
So I'm a vegetarian, aspiring to be vegan, and I've been vegetarian my whole life, and I do focus on dairy and eggs. And my child is vegetarian. And one thing that I found, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say based on talking about processed and unprocessed, but one thing that I found is he's becoming, over the years, increasingly more fussy about what he will eat. And I have found that he actually enjoys some of the processed fake meats. And I want to know your thought about those, and am I a bad mother for giving him those? Because he enjoys them.
Yeah.
And anyway.
No, so he doesn't need them, but you got to eat something. And for a lot of people, that a balance of fats, carbs, and proteins is satiating. And I just got some money from one of the meat guys, and we're going to do, the study's going to be called Swap Meat. It's going to be this study with appetizing plant protein and a meat eating alternative trial. Swap Meat. Do you like the name? So we're gonna get people to swap out, and for 8 weeks have real meat. We're going to deliver it with good eggs, and then for 8 weeks we're going to deliver the fake meat. And we're going to look at all kinds of different things in their body, their blood chemistries and their microbiome and things like that. And I really like this guy who's making this product. He's hilarious. He could be in this film. He is 6'5", vegan, enormous, extremely athletic, and totally dedicated to be vegan. And selling his product, he says, I'm not really after the vegetarians. I'm really after the meat eaters who say they really like meat and they can't imagine life without meat. But my product tastes really good, and it would displace the meat. And so I am all for that role, right? There isn't one answer to this. And so there's all kinds of ways to cook with that and do fun things with it. There isn't anything inherently bad. I would say look at the list of ingredients, because some of them are going to be full of crap. They're trying to make it look, smell, sizzle, and everything like meat, and to do some of it, they're putting some pretty weird stuff in it. So not eating it would probably be better, but if they're, and here's what it comes down to. Okay, I want you to have this fabulous burrito I just made you with a whole wheat, a corn tortilla, and some beans, and some brown rice, and some avocado. And they say, no, but if you sprinkled some chicken crumbles on there from this fake meat place, I would eat it. Yes, go for that, right? I'm a practical parent. Okay, yeah? You haven't asked one yet.
Yeah,
Fair
talking
enough.
about protein for athlete. I have a teen who's a serious dancer, so she non-stop eating per day, but sometimes she eating two protein bar.
Yeah.
Is it this too much for a teen? Because she says, I don't have time to get just check the protein
Yeah.
bar.
So
It's
the-
22 grams of protein, but I look at that, she probably says whey protein, okay, it's not bad stuff, but is it for long term, it's not a good substitute for a meal?
It's not, no. But is the choice skipping a meal?
Yeah. Time wise.
So right, and so I'm pretty frustrated with the time thing. So if she's gonna eat nothing, the protein bar was better than nothing. Was it better than waiting for later for a meal? Could she possibly have less screen time in her life and spend a little more time putting something together? Is there some other thing that you don't even have to cook, you have to assemble, that's not a protein bar? So my biggest problem with the whole bar phenomenon is it's a meal replacement. People like skipping a whole meal and having a bar because it's convenient. I think in the end that's gonna bite us in the butt, and the convenience thing. You've heard the joke, what do Americans fear the most, the economy or terrorists or what? No, inconvenience. Americans fear inconvenience. They will do anything to avoid being inconvenienced. And so it's part of the food thing of being accessible all the time that you mentioned before. The power bars are super convenient. If you're on a bike ride, put it in the back of your bike outfit, or if you're off to dance practice, you can eat it in the car. It's not optimal. But some of the optimal things aren't easy to eat in the car on the way to dance practice. Really, she should make time to eat before dance practice or after dance practice, right? And as a parent, I know that doesn't always work. So I feel for you. It's better than some things, and it's worse than a lot of other things, and you gotta you gotta choose your battles.
So about vegetarianism, you were talking a lot about how beans and other things can substitute for meats. What about fish?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned that some of the, I believe it was oils, have different chain sequences in fish than in other plants. I mean, do you feel that there are things in fish that you're missing out in as a vegetarian?
No, so I don't take any DHA or EPA supplements. Most of the world is landlocked and doesn't eat fish. Americans eat very little fish. Some cultures eat a lot of fish. And some of those are some of these blue zone areas that have more centenarians than anybody else. But a confusing factor is a lot of those have very simple lifestyles and a lot of friends and a great social life. So it's a little confusing. So the things that some fish have, especially cold water fish, is this EPA and DHA. And it's a pretty cool molecule. So of all the fat that you eat in your diet, it's almost all just used for energy. It's a super efficient, it excludes water. So the nice thing about fat in your belly or your butt or anywhere else is if you had to save that much energy in carbohydrate, you'd weigh 500 pounds. Because fat doesn't have water. And muscle, the carbohydrate in your muscle and proteins associated with water, not fat, it excludes water. Super efficient, but these really long chain unsaturated fats in fish double as hormones. They actually go into the DNA. It's been proven they turn things on and off. They convert into a whole family of things called eicosanoids, and sorry I'm gonna mess you up, but there's prostacyclins, leukotrienes, thromboxanes, and there's one family that I'm forgetting that all fall under this umbrella of eicosanoids, and they help regulate your inflammation, your blood pressure, your triglyceride levels, and your blood clotting. And all of the fish oil things we've plausibly connected to health benefits. And so interestingly, in the typical American fashion, rather than having people eat more fish, which is hard, they've been giving them fish oil supplements for decades. and virtually every fish oil supplement trial has failed. If you follow this literature in the health community, and this isn't, so it actually lowers blood triglycerides really well, and blood triglycerides are a risk factor for heart disease. But that's a risk, it's not good enough to lower risk factor. You need to keep somebody out of the hospital or from dying. And I could cite you 40 huge, expensive randomized trials that have failed. Every time I see one, and I see them at least once a month, I just go to the conclusion that said, null finding, that we gave them this dose of fish oil versus a placebo. It's a really easy study to do. Just hand out pills. Fish is harder. Okay, you gotta cook with fish. What kind of fish? Fresh fish. And then an interesting thing about even the cold water fish that have the cool fats. So let's take salmon. Salmon and tuna are great sources of EPA and DHA. So any guess at what proportion of the fat in those fish is EPA and DHA? It's only a third. 2/3 is other fat. And so even when you buy fish oil supplements, if it really is just fish oil, only a third of it is the cool stuff, unless you get if you look closely, if you want to go to your store, they'll say, oh, we're charging you extra because this is high concentrated EPA and DHA and we took the other ones out. But those don't work either. And so the interesting consistent finding is people who eat fish do better. So the fish oil is a plausible thing, but really I think what happens is fish is displacing other foods. So does that make sense? So there's a plausible molecule in cold water fish that's associated with health. I think it's more along the lines of they didn't have a hamburger, they had fish, or they didn't have cookies, or something. That's the challenge in nutrition. It's really hard to say this thing is healthy without saying, well, if they weren't going to eat that thing, what else would they eat? And fish is really hard that way. But all the folks who eat fish, the studies are pretty consistent. Fish eating is good for you. And sort of the data suggests twice a week is usually what they ask for. But if everybody on the planet, if our 8 billion people, what do we got now? 8.5? Are we at 8 still? 7.5? If they had fish twice a week, there'd be no fish left in 2 years. So you can't tell anyone else. Only the people in this room can do it. Otherwise, because we're screwing the ocean over with overfishing right now. And we're catching the wrong kind of fish, and there's other kind of fish that we should catch. So yes, fish could displace some of these things. That might have been more of an answer that you wanted. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the idea of fish displacing something and something less healthy is interesting. And I've heard the same about rice, that people who eat rice on a semi-regular basis tend to have healthier overall profiles because the foods that pair with rice tend to be lean proteins and vegetables and things like that. Is that something
that could make sense?
One
of the things I'm concerned about rice, though, is the size of the amount of rice people are putting under their. It kind of holds things, right? It's like a tortilla would. I remember one of my dietitians was interviewing some Hispanics, asking them what they ate, and they said, "Are you sure that's all you ate all day?" I said, "Yeah." "Did you have any tortillas?" "Yeah, I had dozens of tortillas." "Why did you say that?" "Well, it's like a serving utensil. I wrap stuff. It's food." I said, "Yes. It's food. It has calories. It's not a utensil." I said, "Oh, I wrap stuff up in the corn tortilla and I eat that all day long." So, is it a lot of tortilla? Is it a huge bed of rice? So one of the things that we could do there is keep using the rice. Switch to, I guess another fascinating thing in rice culture is how many types there are. I started to meet some people who have different rice products. I can't remember what sort of maybe Indonesian community this was, but they said, oh yeah, we have 1,000 cultivars of rice. Really? In just your islands? Yeah, so if you ask around, wild rice, black rice, black forbidden rice, brown rice, basmati rice, jasmine rice. So the world of rice is pretty rich. It stores easily, it dries easily, doesn't go bad. So there is a place for rice, but people tend to have too much rice, I think. Especially in these days of diabetes and too many simple carbs. They have a lot of white rice with not enough toppings. So maybe if you made the size of the serving of rice smaller and tried some other cool rices and then had more toppings, I would go for that.
So is there a better rice? I hear people say, nope, never have white, do brown, and then
But that's sort of understating all the cool complexities of rice. I think
Right.
if you want to do rice, you should explore rice. There's some really cool rices out there.
Same note on the coconut oil, basmati white rice was like meant for the summer. Brown rice, the heavier rices were meant for the winter. So you
Nice.
you switch the year round based on what you're harvesting. So that brings me to my
great.
question that eating seasonally, is that a diet in the research world yet? I mean, it's been part of many heritage diets, but it isn't, is there much study going on with seasonal eating?
No, so you can't really study it because we've gone global. So I live near piazzas. You can get anything, any time of year, and people are kind of upset if they can't have mangoes like all year round. And I am a mango slut. I really like mangoes, and I just started buying a different kind of mango. I know there's never any mangoes grown in Palo Alto, so I'm not local. Never. And I drink coffee. It's not local. And I eat dark chocolate. Sometimes 100%. I have 2 boxes 100%. But the ginger's all gone, and that was 70%. Right? So my kid, speaking of kids, swear to God, my 13-year-old eats at least a half a red bell pepper every day, and often a full bell pepper every single day. And a bunch of them are from Mexico. And lately I went to piazzas, and they were from the Netherlands. This week, is it like you can grow red bell peppers right now? Here, they're at the farm. Why did you have to go to the Netherlands? It's cheaper for some reason. Whatever they're growing, and they were organic red bell peppers from the Netherlands. So, sorry, your point is well taken. If we all ate more seasonally, we would probably do better. It's really hard to, I also wish we could go back to just more culinary literacy. And the Ayurvedic practices are phenomenal. And I have an Indian cardiologist who's really into the Indian population and wishing we could get back to Ayurvedic body types and figuring that out. So that we couldn't find much data. They were like trying to find Ayurvedic body types and eating differently. And there's a little out there. It's just harder to get. How do you monetize that? So who's going to pay for it? Is the NIH going to pay for it? No, they're going to pay for drug studies. Is India going to pay for US studies? Okay, let's keep going this way. How about more like, is organic worth it? What is the ketogenic diet?
I'm very curious about intermittent fasting and regular fasting and your thoughts on that.
Okay. So a fascinating natural experiment is religious fasting, right? And so we have a lot of Ramadan type things or fasting for multiple periods of time. There's also even some interesting fasting experiments that were war-driven. Some population got isolated and then they checked them years later and they were living longer and they had fewer problems. So there is something with fasting going on. So you don't want war and you don't want to be deprived. So it's more of a voluntary fasting right now. We've tried to study this. Actually, one of my postdocs published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the design was one group cuts back 25% of their calories every day. And the other group gets 100% one day and 50 the next, 150. And so one of the ideas, and this is always a challenge in science, they tried to match it so that 150, 150, 150 is just like 75 all the time. So is there a benefit to going back and forth from eating enough to little? And they found no differences in the groups, in weight or any blood chemistries or anything like that. The reviewers ate them up in trying to publish it, saying, can you prove they didn't just all cheat and eat the same thing? Were they all the same because they just cheated? And in the kind of studies that I do, if you didn't want them to cheat, you have to house them in a prison or a jail or something with a camera on them, and you can only do a few people at a time. And I just finished a weight loss study with 600 people for a year. And the reviewer said, how do you know they ate what you said? I said, well, I told them it was really important. And it got published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They believe me because of all this stuff that we did, but at the end of the day, I can't be sure. They told me what they ate. So the literature on intermittent fasting is interesting. It hasn't shown anything compellingly positive yet. I do know that so one of the things Americans like is simple rules. And sometimes what's helpful about this is how simple it could be. I have breakfast and then I don't eat till dinner. And I'm a little hungry, but I learned I get over it pretty fast. Another type of intermittent fast is just, I have dinner and I have no snacks at night. That would actually be fine because you're gonna go to sleep anyway. There's some people who, out of 7 days of the week, they don't eat 2 days. They eat for 5 days. And so one of the problems with the intermittent fasting world is nobody has one definition. The intermittent part is, I pick this frame of time when I don't eat, and the rest of the time I do. And so one of the intuitive things is, if you didn't eat anything today and tomorrow you can eat as much as you want, you probably won't eat double tomorrow. You'll be full. You might actually need like 110% of what you get, but you won't eat 200%. And so you'll eat fewer calories and you'll lose weight. Metabolically, your body's freaked out. It thinks you're starving. All kinds of hormones get released. So most of us think it's a bad idea because your body takes steps when, just evolutionarily, your body takes steps when it thinks you're starving and there's no food supply. So we evolved on feast and famine, and your body kicks into this other gear when you're in famine. And in theory, we don't think the hormones that get released are good for you.
I thought maybe like cortisol and
yeah.
So I thought maybe that the hormesis theory was that, you know, challenge yourself every so often, and then that's, you know, it causes regeneration. Or you follow me?
And yes, I do, but I haven't seen anybody prove it compellingly. And when we try to do studies, it's hard to do clean studies unless. So another type of study we do is with a very small number of people under tightly controlled conditions, and then the critique of that usually is those were freaks. The people willing to do that were not normal, and so that doesn't apply to me. So I don't have a good answer.
I don't want to keep piggybacking on the same question, so
Yeah.
I'll just do this one more once.
Yeah.
So the fast mimicking diet, I don't know if you happen to be familiar with this researcher Longo in USC who even has a product that he sells. So I think he probably would be skeptical of the
I'm always skeptical
pro-life,
of
of course. But he's a researcher, and he and Matson, who are anyway. And the idea, they're trying to make it easier for people who are not just the freaks, who are willing to do this really extreme thing, but anybody who would undergo a certain amount of stress in order to do these longer fasts, then can allegedly gain all these benefits. And I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. If you had an opinion on the fast mimicking diets.
And I don't.
No.
And another reason part of this came to light is they started fasting some animals, and the ones who fasted and ate fewer calories lived longer.
Right.
And then the conclusion was, but miserably. They were hungry the whole time, but you can do that to animals, and you can't do that to humans. And they tried to do a human study, and the acronym was CALORIE. And it actually was kind of cool they made the acronym. And they were supposed to eat 25% less for 2 years.
Right.
They couldn't do it.
Yeah.
You could do it for a day, you could do it for a week, you could do it stoically for a month, but not for 2 years. So most people couldn't do it. So I've seen the papers coming out of this study.
So those two things are slightly different? Sorry, maybe
Yes.
maybe you meant the same thing, eating fewer calories.
And fasting is
and
different,
fasting,
yeah. So eating less is not the same as fasting.
Right. Anyway.
It's a hard, like how long are you eating less? What's the period of time when you're eating nothing? What would you consider the minimum amount of time to be a fast? Would it be a day, or could it be less than a day?
I consider it less than a day. I'm currently recently doing something where I feed, I love that expression, within a 6-hour window and then fast for a minute at a time. But it's really an experiment. It's something I've only just begun. I'm just curious to see what happens. But I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm hoping for other, sort of neurogenesis or.
I think it's more spiritual than anything else, personally.
It's really interesting to kind of lean into it.
I've tried it twice in my life. I fasted 3 times, and both times, like on the 3rd day, I did some athletic thing, and I rocked it. It's like I wasn't falling over like, oh, I don't have enough energy. It's like, you get over feeling hungry, it's like, oh, that was psychological. I wasn't really all that hungry. I have all these stores. Hey, I just released them. So it's kind of an interesting experiment if you haven't fasted before. To try it, it makes you a little less desperate when like, I haven't had lunch, and I have to. No, you don't have to have lunch right now. You can skip it, because all they have is junk.
So this list of diets that you have here, any that you think are reasonable or unreasonable?
Mediterranean wins every time.
And what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So it's a plant-based diet. It could be vegan or vegetarian, but it doesn't have to be. It's got a lot of fat. It's got nuts, seeds, avocados, olive oil, but it's a lot of plant fats. And it's whole grains and legumes and veggies. So I'll tell you my study design right now that I'm having fun with because it kind of ties in with all this. I think we're actually just about to start this study. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to be in our, I'm just curious, has anybody here ever been in one of my studies? I had 2,000 people in our, usually when I give a talk, somebody has been one of our participants. Okay, never mind. And it would probably be a violation of some HIPAA thing if you actually told me this. Because I'm not supposed to say you're in my study. So, the ketogenic diet, I'll just get, because this should come up. It's a really hot topic right now. Most people are screwing up and they don't understand what it is. They think, well, part of it is it's a super low carb diet. And what they think is it's a really high meat diet. Because meat doesn't have any carbs. Meat is all protein and fat. So picture this, if the only carbs that would be in an animal are the ones stored in the skeletal muscle and the liver. And if you're not eating the liver and you're eating the muscle, there was a little bit of carb there. But slaughtering meat converts the carbs right away after death into something else. There's no carbs in meat, so people think it's a lot of meat. Being in ketosis means your central nervous system and brain are accustomed to about 50 or something percent of your calories from carbs. And you always burn fats and carbs together. If you ever look at a mitochondria, there's these cool pathways that show you feed carb and you feed fat, and you burn them together, super efficient. In the absence of carb feeding into this cycle, the fats start breaking down and they spin off to something called ketones. And we often say your brain and your central nervous system is the one thing that really only, it just likes glucose. It doesn't like any fat. The rest of your body, your muscles, like carbohydrate and fat, but central nervous system and brain really only likes glucose. And fatty acids, the big long ones I talked about, won't cross the blood-brain barrier. They can't get in. But ketones can, because they're little byproducts of fat. So if you haven't eaten any carbs and all you have is fat, you can survive on ketones. And so what actually happens is you get something called the keto flu for the first couple of weeks. You feel like shit for a while. You get nauseated, you get headaches. And then as people come out the other side, they say, oh, I'm in heaven. I feel blissful. The fog is lifted from my brain. I feel super energetic. And what you're doing, you're only burning fat now. You're not burning carbs. And to stay in that state, you can't eat hardly any carbs. 20 to 50 grams a day. And you currently eat like 400 grams of carbs a day. And so going from 400 to 20 to 50 is really cutting back. And the other thing that people don't get, so I'm going to tell you this for your friends that are on keto, or if you're on keto, you can't eat a lot of protein. There's no place to store protein. Remember I said that earlier? So when you eat more protein than you need, which isn't very much, which I also said earlier, the first thing you do is you turn the amino acids into carbs. And you throw yourself out of ketosis. You like undermine the whole thing. So the ketogenic diet, if you want to see the gurus of this, it's Steve Phinney and Jeff Volek who wrote the gurus book of the ketogenic diet. A well-formulated ketogenic diet is 75% fat. 5% carb, 20% protein, and 75% fat. And I challenge you to design a diet that's palatable, that's 75% fat. Do you know that nuts have fat? They also have carbs. You can't eat a lot of nuts. Do you know that avocados have fat? They do. It also has carbs. You can't eat all that many avocados. You have to eat a lot of gristle and fat and butter, and it's really hard to come up with this and eat it day after day. And a lot of people lose a lot of weight on the ketogenic diet, partly because the foods that are okay are just not that palatable after a while. You can only eat so much straight fat, and then it's like, I would love a piece of bread, or some beans right now, or a piece of fruit, but I can't, because those have carbs, and so I'm not hungry.
So are there any physiological studies done on the physiological effect of the ketogenic diet?
No, so this is what we're designing, and one of my best friends right now is a microbiologist named Justin Sonneman, who wrote a really cool book called The Good Gut, and he studies the microbiome. And part of carbs that we didn't get into is fiber. And the definition of fiber is it's a type of carbohydrate that's long strings of carbon units that you can't break down enough to be small enough to absorb in your upper small intestine, so it goes to your colon, and you'll probably poop it out unless you feed the healthy bacteria that live in your colon, and that is the most concentrated place of healthy bacteria in your colon. And we are starting to understand the microbiome, which is this hugely complex set of organisms in your colon. And Justin's hypothesis, after doing this for a decade and getting a lot of grants, is that they thrive on fiber, and diverse fiber. If you're eating a ketogenic diet and you're not eating any fruit and any grain and any beans and any potatoes and any carrots, so you can't have any carbs that were underground, like the starchy ones. You can have lettuce and cauliflower and broccoli, but not all that much. So you can't possibly get very much fiber. So one of the biological things, physiological things that we're worried about is that you're not getting enough fiber. And what happens, at least in his mouse studies, you don't have a lot of human studies. So in your colon, there's this slimy mucus that protects you from nasty things that you've eaten that could hurt you. And they don't, because they just pass out in the feces. And so this microbiome is living in there, and they love fiber. And the mucus lining is made of carb-like molecules. And in the absence of fiber, is this incredible electron microscopy pictures of the bacteria eating the mucus lining and thinning the lining and making you more susceptible to damage that gets absorbed in your colon and leads to inflammation and impaired immune function. So we're about to recruit a bunch of people and ask them to do keto for 3 months and Mediterranean for 3 months. So here's the study design. Tell me if you like this. So there's nothing in the definition. So part of this was, how do you define the Mediterranean diet? So that there's multiple ways to define it, and there's actually a Mediterranean diet score that takes veggies, beans, grains, dairy, meat, alcohol. There's 9 different things, and it's a goofy thing. They take the spread of all those things, and if you're above the median, you get a point for a good thing, and if you're below the median in a bad thing, you get a point. And there's 9 things, so you can get 9 points. But it's kind of goofy because somebody could be just below the median in 9, and somebody could be perfectly in the 9, and they would get the same score. Anyway, it doesn't actually say anything about added sugar or refined grain. So what our study plan is going to be is we're going to get these people and ask them to go Mediterranean and follow all these guidelines and have no added sugar or refined grain. We might need to coach on the no added sugar, because we really want them to wipe out the added sugar and the refined grain, but encourage beans, fruits, and whole grains, right? And then the ketogenic group is going to have no added sugar and no refined grain, and they're actually better at it. When you tell them you can't have any carb, they're really good at it, because those are the easiest ones to recognize. They're a little hesitant to give some of the other stuff. They say, I really know I can't have refined grain and added sugar. So they kick ass at lowering that. But they also are not supposed to have any grains or fruits or beans. And so the study design is, if both groups are getting rid of their added sugar and refined grain, which is about 1/4 of all Americans' calories or more, and one group absolutely avoids beans, grains, and fruits, and the other one promotes beans, grains, and fruits, not only what happened to your blood chemistries, but what happens to your microbiome, and then what happens to your immune function. So we don't have that answer, but we're really intrigued what the physiological implications of that are. So they'll be matched on low added sugar and refined grain, but they'll be completely different in those other aspects. And kind of our hypothesis is, yes, get rid of the added sugar and refined grain. Get rid of all the fruits and whole grains and beans. No, that's not necessary. Get rid of the added sugar and refined grain first. And when you have your saturated fat, have that coconut, or have a small amount of butter, and it's okay. Just don't replace it with added sugar and refined grain. And that's why I think this is sort of it's kind of got all these things in it, all the best parts of it. So you can have your fat and your carbs, and it's tasty. So people, the Mediterranean diet doesn't have this aura of, oh, that's so, yeah?
I was going to say, can you explain what the flexitarian is? I've never heard of that
Yeah,
one.
and so that's one where it's sort of an ethical thing. So some vegans and vegetarians are really obnoxious, aren't they? They're like I'm super self-righteous and you are unethical, and it's a huge turnoff. So a flexitarian is someone who eats a lot of vegan and vegetarian meals, but not all of them. So it's the kind, picture this. You know somebody who eats 19 vegan meals a week, and twice they have some egg, dairy, or meat or fish. And to some people, they'd be like, okay, the health difference between those 2 meals or not is nothing. Whereas a really militant vegetarian or vegan would say, you lied. You told me you were vegetarian. And I see how unethical. It's like ridiculous. Come on, the difference between 19 and 20 meals is ridiculous. So the flexitarians are doing a lot of the things right, and they're flexible enough to go to a social event where it's ribs, and they're having ribs. They're not going hungry. That would be my definition of flexitarian. Okay, we have hit 8 o'clock. It seems like that, I don't know, I was on a roll and I finished up with a good one. Would that be enough for tonight? If anybody has a one-on-one, I'll stick around for a little longer. Are we gonna win a raffle?
Yeah, we're gonna do that right now. Yeah, we'll do that in a second, but just quickly, I'm Dave Shen, if you haven't met me. I am co-VP of PTAC's Health and Wellness Committee, and my much better and smarter counterpart is Smita Vasudeva sitting in the front here. She's also my co-VP of PTAC Health and Wellness as well. Thanks so much for Christopher Gardner to be here with us. As a serious nutrition nerd, I find whenever I listen to him talk, I enjoyed his talk at Fairmeadow last year. He's probably one of the most neutral guys I've ever met in nutrition. Like, you always meet guys like low carb this, you didn't talk about your recent study. It's unfortunate we never got into that. But he's pretty neutral on everything, which is very rare to find in the nutrition world. So thanks very much.
Objective, not neutral, right, Dave?
Objective.
Objective.
Objective, yeah.
Quick.
Yeah. All right. Christopher, you want to do the honors?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So a tradition we have with these talks is to give away favorite books from the speaker.
Oh, wow.
So,
And one of them is The Good Gut.
yeah. Want to do that one first?
Yeah. Okay, here's the grand prize, the microbiome book. Drum roll, please. 864-2066. I bet it's just the last 2 numbers that make a difference, right? 66 for the last 2 numbers.
Good job. All right, next one. In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan.
Okay, and the last 2 numbers are 54.
Yeah, all right. You have the book.
How about a different one?
You want to offer? Yeah, offer her the stack. How
All
about that?
right. Omnivore's Dilemma.
That too.
Eating animals.
Eating animals.
I don't have.
Jonathan Saffron.
All right. There you go. Congrats.
Okay, that seems fair. And we'll have a white elephant thing afterward, and you can try to trade the book.
Yeah, we're not trading with each other. It's fine.
You want it?
All right, let's do it. In Defense of Food again.
55.
That's me.
Hey, all right. Yes.
2 more.
Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara
Kingsolver. Yeah, she's a great writer. 60. Blue 60.
Hey, all right. All right.
This is your
Finally,
last chance. This is your last chance.
Omnivore's Dilemma.
Whatever
Again by Michael Pollan.
things you want to do here. 62.
Hey, all right. Oh, thanks again for coming. One last thing. I would love it if you went to this URL, http://ds.ly/Gardner
Really?
2018, and tell us what you think of this talk. I really appreciate it.
That was ds.ly.
Yes, ds.ly, Gardner 2018.
Yeah, great.
If we mind just whipping out your phone right now and doing it right now, I appreciate it.
Sure.
4 questions, maybe?
And thanks again for coming.
What is this group that you're part of, PTAC?
Oh.
PTA.
Yeah. PTAC is PTA Council.
Okay.
So we're kind of the more, we work on like district-wide type issues. So there's usually a health and wellness rep. I'm the health and wellness rep over Walter Hayes as well, or health and safety, we call it over there. But I also work on district-wide things with the meeting. So that's why like this talk is for everyone. We like to invite everybody from across the district. Anything else? Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the food as well.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm a former militant
I'm not sure what
vegan.
I'm gonna do with that.
Yeah.
Now I'm just a regular vegan, but yeah. So
It was
I know
funny,
the
so
story.
at the farmer's market at the California Ave, this
Yeah.
last couple weeks,
Yeah.
you know, what was that movie where they're wearing the mask? V is for something. Anyway, they had these masks,
It's just a little bit.
black outfits,
Yeah.
and they were holding
yeah,
out
I saw
horrific
that.
pictures of animals.
Yeah.
And they had this thing, and one of my neighbors said,
That's DS.